The town had already settled into the quiet of the night. A small place, the kind where nothing ever happened. The streets were empty, save for the flickering of streetlights reflecting off rain-damp pavement. It should have been peaceful. Then the explosion shook the ground. A deafening roar split through the silence as flames erupted from the second floor of an old wooden house at the end of the street. The sky, moments ago dark and still, was now alive with fire, glowing orange against the rising smoke. Panic spread. Neighbors ran from their homes, shouting for help, dialing 911, but no one dared to get too close. The fire was too strong, the heat too intense. A man's voice rang out, desperate, pleading. Somebody's still inside. My mother, she can't get out. Keanu Reeves hadn't planned on being here. He had stopped at a quiet roadside cafe just outside of town, hoping for a quick meal before continuing his trip. He had spent years on the road, avoiding the spotlight when he could, moving from place to place with quiet anonymity. But fate had a way of pulling him into the unexpected. Standing on the edge of the growing crowd, he saw the flames rising higher, consuming the house like a hungry beast. He heard the man screaming for anyone to do something. And then, beyond the roar of the fire, beyond the chaos and the sirens in the distance, he heard it. A cough. Weak. Struggling. Someone was alive in there. People were frozen in fear, unsure what to do. But Keanu moved. Without hesitation, he pushed through the bystanders and ran straight toward the burning house. A man reached out, grabbing his arm. You can't go in there. You'll never make it out. Keanu barely paused. His eyes locked onto a second-story window, its glass already shattered from the heat. Smoke poured out in thick, suffocating waves. The main entrance was nothing but fire now. If he was getting in, it had to be through there. He pulled his jacket tighter around himself and climbed onto the porch railing. With one last glance at the terrified crowd behind him, he jumped. The heat hit him like a wall. Smoke burned his throat, forcing him to cover his mouth with his sleeve as he scanned the room. Then he saw her. An elderly woman sat curled in the corner, arms wrapped around herself, shaking. Her silver hair was damp with sweat, her clothes covered in soot. She looked up, blinking through the smoke, barely registering his presence. Who are you? She whispered, voice weak. Keanu didn't waste time explaining. He grabbed the remains of a heavy blanket from a nearby chair, shook off the embers, and wrapped it around her shoulders. I'm getting you out of here. She tried to stand, but her legs buckled beneath her. She was too weak, too disoriented. Without hesitation, he lifted her into his arms. The flames were closing in, the fire feeding on every inch of the house. The way he came in was no longer an option. He needed another way out. His eyes locked onto the front of the house. The entrance was collapsing, burning wood crashing to the floor in a shower of embers. Then the ceiling groaned. A second later, it began to cave in. The fire roared like a beast, consuming everything in its path. Smoke filled the air, turning every breath into a struggle. Keanu tightened his grip around the elderly woman in his arms, his mind racing for a way out. The front door was gone, devoured by the flames. The window he had come through was now an inferno. The heat pressed against his skin, suffocating, relentless. There was no clear escape. Then a deep, ominous crack. The ceiling above them shuddered. Embers fell like burning raindrops, and in an instant, a section of the roof caved in behind them. Wooden beams crashed to the floor, throwing sparks into the air. Keanu shielded the woman's head as he took a step back, his heart pounding. They were running out of time. The woman coughed weakly against his chest. Leave me. Save yourself, she whispered. Keanu's jaw clenched. Not happening, his eyes darted around the room, scanning for another way out. Think. Think. That's when he saw it. A hallway, partially blocked by fallen debris, led toward the back of the house. It wasn't safe, but nothing was safe anymore. If they were getting out, this was the only way. Taking a deep breath, Keanu adjusted his grip on the woman and pushed forward. Each step was a gamble. The wooden floor groaned beneath his weight, weakened by the relentless fire. If it gave way, they'd both be lost. But there was no time to hesitate. He pressed on, dodging burning debris, navigating through the collapsing house with the kind of focus that had defined his career. Only this time, there were no cameras, no rehearsals, no second takes. They reached the hallway just as another beam crashed down behind them, sealing off the living room. No going back now. The woman stirred slightly in his arms, trying to lift her head. Who are you? Keanu glanced down, offering her the faintest smile despite the chaos. Just someone who couldn't stand around and do nothing. Her grip tightened slightly on his sleeve, as if she understood. They reached the back of the house. A door stood ahead, cracked open, but blocked by fallen furniture and broken pieces of the ceiling. The fire had already spread into the kitchen beyond it, but if they could get through, there was a chance. Keanu shifted the woman's weight carefully and used his free arm to push against the debris. The heat was unbearable now, sweat dripping from his forehead, but he didn't stop. He couldn't. With a grunt, he shoved a broken cabinet aside, clearing enough space to squeeze through. The door groaned as he pushed it open, revealing the backyard and freedom. But just as he took a step forward, the floor collapsed beneath him. For a split second, gravity took over. The world tilted as Keanu and the woman plunged downward, fire and debris following close behind. The world was a blur of fire and falling debris. For a moment, it felt like time had slowed, the sounds of crackling flames and crumbling wood fading into the background as Keanu and the elderly woman plunged downward. His arms tightened around her, instinct kicking in. Then impact. Keanu landed hard, his body taking the full force of the fall. A sharp pain shot through his side, but there was no time to focus on it. He had shielded the woman, keeping her safe in his grip. She was coughing, disoriented, but still breathing. They were alive. Above them, the house groaned. The fire was still raging, consuming what little remained of the structure. They had seconds before it all came down. Keanu forced himself to his feet, pain shooting through his leg, but he didn't stop. Pain didn't matter. She mattered. Getting out mattered. He scanned the room they had fallen into, what was once a basement, now just a skeleton of its former self. Smoke poured in from the hole above, turning the air thick and toxic. There was only one way out, a small window near the ceiling, half covered by fallen debris. He adjusted his grip on the woman and moved, stepping over broken furniture and piles of burning wood. Every step sent a jolt of pain through his body, but he pushed forward, eyes locked on that one sliver of hope, the exit. Behind them, the fire roared louder. They weren't going to make it unless they moved now. Keanu reached the window, but it was too high to climb with her in his arms. He set her down gently, speaking through ragged breaths. I need you to hold on to me, okay? I'm getting you out of here. She nodded weakly, trusting him completely. With every ounce of strength he had left, Keanu lifted her, pushing her toward the opening. His muscles burned, his body screaming in protest, but he didn't stop. He could hear the walls giving way behind them. They were seconds from being buried alive. Finally, she reached the window, gripping the frame with trembling hands. Keanu gave one final push, helping her climb through. She was out. But before he could follow, the ground beneath him collapsed again. The last thing he saw was the sky vanishing as he fell into darkness. The world blurred. Voices. Sirens. The distant hum of people shouting. Keanu's eyes fluttered open to see the elderly woman leaning over him. Her face, streaked with soot, was filled with something he hadn't seen before: relief. He was outside. Alive. The firefighters had arrived just in time, pulling him from the wreckage moments before the house was completely lost. The woman hadn't left his side. Her son, the man who had screamed for help earlier, rushed forward, his voice thick with emotion. "You saved her. You saved my mother." Keanu, exhausted, just nodded. He hadn't done it for thanks. He had done it because it was the right thing to do. The woman reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. "You didn't have to risk your life for me." Keanu gave a small, tired smile. Someone had to. She held onto him a little longer, tears glistening in her eyes. "The world needs more people like you. But here's the real question. If you saw someone in danger, would you step in? Would you risk everything for a stranger, knowing that no one would ever know your name or tell your story? Heroes don't wear capes. They don't always make the headlines. Sometimes they're just people who refuse to stand by when someone else needs help. So, what would you do? Let us know in the comments below. Have you ever witnessed an act of real-life heroism? If you believe in courage, kindness, and doing what's right, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. More stories like this are coming soon.